Good evening. I am a first-generation migrant who came to Australia 8 years ago, seeking a better lifestyle for my family. My wife and I have diligently paid our taxes and worked 60-hour weeks to save for a down payment on our only home. Now, as a proud Australian, I take every opportunity to actively participate in community events that help me integrate within the Australian society. How have I created a housing crisis in Australia?
Thank you for your question, Hannah. I'll start with you, Michael, because the opposition has put immigration very much on the agenda when it comes to housing.
Well, thank you, Hamid. Good question. And I often preface these comments by saying I'm from a migrant background myself. So I'm a great proponent of migration, and Hamid, you've been another part of a long success story. But the truth is, for migrants as much as it is for Australians who are born here, one of our duties as a government is to make sure that our migration program does not mean that our infrastructure and our lives in big cities are affected negatively. We've seen in the last 2 years under this government around 1 million migrants, and we're building about a quarter of the number of homes as migrants. Now, you never blame the migrant because they are lawfully coming into this country under our migration program. So, Hamid, we don't blame individuals, but it's the duty of government to make sure that we have a planned migration program that ensures that we can build the number of homes needed, because the people who are migrating to Australia, like my father, came here to enjoy the great Australian dream. One of those, for many people, is that prospect of home ownership. From where my father came from, that wasn't really a prospect that you would ever own your own home unless you inherited the family home. That's the same for many others. So we're not helping the migrants and we're not helping those who are already here if we have a migration program that's out of step with what I consider the most important infrastructure. Tunnels and roads are important, but a roof over people's heads, in my view and in the Coalition's view, is the most important infrastructure, and you've got to make sure you connect those two. So 1 million migrants, when you're building fewer homes than the former Coalition government, Clare, that is not a recipe for success, but we never criticise the individual people.
Let me ask Hamid,
we criticise the government.
Do you feel like you've been scapegoated?
Well, I appreciate the comments from the Shadow Minister that they're not blaming individuals, but I'm also concerned about the messaging and the long-term implications it has. So, for example, when the leaders of this country make populist and simplistic statements like slashing migration is going to simply resolve the housing crisis, I think that has deep long-term implications. I think that certainly Australia is a land of opportunity, but you have to realize that, it is going to have a very long-term implication in regards to how
how migrants are feeling in the country.
How migrants are feeling in the country, and I think it's going to essentially create polarization in the wider Australian society.
Let me put that to you, Aruna. And the substantial part of the question, immigration, and it's bipartisan, certainly the levels are different, but it's a bipartisan view that you have to need to lower migration to deal with housing. Is that correct?
OK, so first things first, the bigger driver of our shortage of housing on the demand side is Australians' demand for space. That has increased. Our household sizes are getting smaller. That is a bigger impact than the impact of migration. So I think it's really important to lay the facts out here. And there's a few reasons for that. One is that our family sizes are smaller. Another is that we're ageing. And another is that coming out of the pandemic, people want more space and they're willing to move and pay for it. Now, some of that will change over time. Some of that will adjust. But it's important to be really clear about the fact that Australians are demanding more space than they did before. So there's less of us to a house, and that alone accounts for the change over recent years, would account for about 300,000 extra homes that we need just to accommodate the same population. Second point, reducing migration to try and solve a housing problem, to me, flips things around. If we've got a housing system that is not enabling us to bring in the people that we need, then that's going to be really costly. And businesses will tell you it's costly because they can't get the workers that they need. The universities will tell you it's costly because it hits one of our most successful export industries. The care sector will tell you it's costly because it affects our aged care workforce, our childcare workforce. So if we don't get our housing system right and we can't accommodate the workforce that we need, the working age population we need, that creates all sorts of problems elsewhere. So even a reduction such as what the Coalition's proposed of 25,000 in terms of our skilled migration, we've calculated that would cost us more than $200 billion over 30 years. And that's because migrants pay more in tax than they take in services. And so we can do it. We can cut migration, but we shouldn't pretend like that isn't a very costly way to go about solving a housing problem when actually the source of the problem is our failure to build enough houses for the population we always knew we were going to have by this point. So we've got only a couple of 100,000 more people than we knew we were going to have 5 or 6 years ago.
Alan Kohler, are the immigration numbers part of the housing crisis?
Well, between 2005 and 2008, immigration, net overseas migration into Australia tripled, and there was after that a long period, 8 to 10 years of housing shortage. And there's another housing shortage now because there's been a big increase in immigration. So that, I think Aruna's absolutely right that we need to address the supply of houses. I mean, we can't actually cut back immigration too much, if at all, but it's clearly an issue. We need to think about it. I would like to see migration in some way connected to housing.
Well, I think the minister's been talking about that today.
No, but what I mean is that the number of the number of migrants should be associated with the amount of housing that is being built in some way.
Right, so there should be a nexus between the two.
I would like to see a press release, a joint press release from the Minister of Immigration and the Minister for Housing saying this is how many people have arrived, this is how many houses have been built, and this is kind of...
You're disagreeing, Aruna.
The situation.
It's just that the federal government doesn't build houses, though, so I think what's missing in that is there's a federalism problem we have here, right? So we can...
That old chestnut.
we can obviously talk about the role of the federal government and it's important, but ultimately what drives the number of houses we have is state governments and local governments. And so that's the point, that's the coordination failure, right?
But in the defence of Alan, we've had a...
Someone in the defence
who
of
can
Alan.
defend himself, but we've had a million people in 2 years. That is unprecedented, really, other than when you look at immediate post-World War II. Has not been the long-term average. So if you're going to ramp up, as the Albanese government has, migration to 1 million over 2 years when you're building fewer homes...
We're going to keep this discussion going.
It's going to be a problem.